So, we're all here today because we're all kind of obsessed with this whole aging thing. Like, what's going on? What's the future hold for us? We all experience it. We see the time passing, but what if it's not just like things wearing out? What if there's something else going on underneath, like some sort of program in our bodies?
Yeah, and that's the really kind of wild idea that we're going to be digging into today.
Hmm.
For so long, people thought that aging was just like wear and tear, just like an engine
Right.
slowly falling apart. But some really cutting edge research is starting to suggest that there might be something more to it. Like maybe it is at least partly written right into our DNA.
A program for aging. Wow, that sounds super sci-fi. But the stuff we've been looking at, especially this one study from 2021 by these two scientists, Dr. Steve Horvath and Dr. Harold Katcher, they actually published it again in Nature Aging just this year. It's really pointing in that direction. So our mission today is to really get into this whole programmed aging concept. Like what's the evidence for it? How does it compare to the usual wear and care idea? And what could it mean for how we live and how long we live? So,
Totally.
let's just jump right in. What is this programmed aging theory all about when you really get down to it?
Well, at its core, the programmed aging theory says that aging isn't just this random, breakdown. It's more like a carefully orchestrated process almost. Like our bodies have this internal clock that's maybe controlled by our epigenetics.
Okay.
Those chemical tags on our DNA that tell genes when to turn on and off.
Yeah.
So this theory is saying that this clock starts ticking as soon as we're born, and the way it progresses is a major part of why we age.
So instead of just picturing cells getting old and breaking down, we should also be thinking about a sequence of events, like it's happening on a schedule.
Exactly.
That's a totally different way of looking at it than the whole wear and tear idea that we've all heard a million times. I always think of Aubrey de Grey with that one, right?
Yeah, Dr. Aubrey de Grey is a big proponent of that theory.
Yeah.
So that wear and tear theory really focuses on this buildup of damage at the molecular and cellular level over time. So things like DNA mutations, misfolded proteins, and all that. And it says that aging is mainly a result of this constant accumulation of damage. But the programmed aging view suggests that while damage definitely plays a role, there might also be this underlying genetic program that's kind of directing certain aspects of aging.
Okay, so are these two ideas completely opposite, or is there any way they could both be true?
Well, most scientists now are leaning towards what's called a hybrid view.
Okay.
It's probable that both program mechanisms and this accumulated damage are contributing significantly to aging.
Okay.
For example, that epigenetic clock we mentioned earlier might actually influence how susceptible we are to damage and how well our bodies can repair themselves. It's this really complex interplay. We're still trying to figure out all the details.
So we've got this idea of a program, and one of the things that really jumped out at me in the research was this thing called the universal methylation clock.
Right.
What is that, and why is it so important for this whole theory?
This is where that 2021 study by Horvath and Katcher gets really fascinating.
Okay.
They analyzed DNA methylation patterns across a huge range of mammals, like 128 different species, everything from these tiny little shrews to giant whales.
Wow.
Now remember, DNA methylation is all about those chemical tags that attach to DNA
Yeah.
and can control gene activity.
Yeah.
What they found was incredible. Across all these different animals, they could pinpoint just 54 specific methylation sites that were unbelievably accurate at predicting an animal's age.
Wait, just 54 sites out of all the billions of pieces of information in our DNA, and that worked for all these different animals. That's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really is. It's like finding the same few worn-out steps on a staircase in all these completely different buildings.
That's a good analogy.
So the really significant thing here is the predictability and the fact that it's so consistent. These weren't just random changes happening differently in each species.
Right.
The same methylation sites were changing consistently with age in almost all the mammals they looked at.
Huh.
And even more interesting, many of these key methylation sites were near genes that are known to be super important for development.
Development, that's a really interesting connection. So genes that are important when we're growing up might also be involved in aging later on.
Exactly.
That kind of ties into that whole idea of antagonistic pleiotropy that we've talked about before, doesn't it?
It does think of it this way. A gene might be really great at helping us grow strong and reproduce when we're young,
Uh-huh.
but later on, that same gene might have these unintended side effects that actually contribute to aging.
Oh, so it's like a trade-off almost.
Right. The fact that these age-predictive methylation sites are near these developmental genes really supports the idea that aging might be connected to processes that are crucial early in life. And as Dr. Ketcher himself has said, the amazing precision and consistency they saw across all these different species would be extremely unlikely if aging was just random damage building up. It really points to this underlying programmed mechanism at work.
Okay, so this universal methylation clock seems like pretty strong evidence for programmed aging. Are there other findings from different areas of research that kind of back this up too?
Yeah, definitely one super exciting area is epigenetic reprogramming.
Okay.
Scientists have been working with these things called Yamanaka factors.
Okay.
It's a set of genes often called the OSKM genes, and they can basically rewind a cell's developmental clock. Studies like one in 2023 by Liu and his team have shown that these factors can actually reverse the epigenetic age of cells in mice, like they're hitting the reset button on some of the aging-related changes in their tissues.
Wow, so they're actually turning back time at a cellular level.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
That suggests that the epigenetic changes we see with aging aren't necessarily like permanent damage, but more like instructions that can be rewritten.
Exactly. It's like the epigenetic landscape, which shifts and changes as we age, can be nudged back to a more youthful state.
Interesting.
Another really convincing line of evidence comes from Dr. Katcher's own work with blood plasma. He found this specific fraction of plasma called E5.
Oh.
And when they gave it to rats, it actually extended their lifespan.
Wow.
This suggests that there might be stuff circulating in our blood that contributes to aging, and that we might be able to modify these factors.
So it's not just about what's happening inside our individual cells, but also about the signals they're getting from the rest of the body.
Right. It's like aging is way more interconnected than we maybe thought.
It seems like it, yeah.
And lastly, we see that many of the genes and signaling pathways that are involved in aging, like MTOR and IGF-1, are found across tons of different species.
Yeah.
This evolutionary conservation, again, suggests that these aren't just random things happening, but these evolved mechanisms that play a big role in how long we live.
This is all super promising. If aging is at least partly programmed, it opens up some really exciting possibilities for how we might be able to influence it. You know, our sources talk about this idea of hacking the aging program.
Right.
What does that actually look like in terms of research and potential therapies?
Well, the research is still pretty early, but there are several really promising avenues that scientists are looking into. Epigenetic reprogramming, as we've been talking about, is one of the key areas.
Okay.
Companies like Altos Labs and Rejuvenate Bio are actively working on these partial reprogramming techniques. The idea is to kind of rejuvenate cells just enough to see benefits without completely reverting them to an embryonic state, which could have some unwanted risks.
So it's like walking this tightrope between getting some of that youthful energy back, but not going too far and causing other problems.
Precisely. Then there are the plasma-based therapies that build on Dr. Katcher's findings. Researchers are trying to pinpoint the exact components in younger blood that might have these rejuvenating effects and see if we can use them therapeutically.
Oh, okay.
And we can't forget about existing drugs that target known aging pathways, like rapamycin, which inhibits the MTOR pathway. Studies have shown that rapamycin can make animals live longer in various models, which suggests that targeting these fundamental aging pathways could be beneficial.
Interesting.
There's also a lot of buzz around senolytics, which are drugs designed to get rid of senescent cells, those old damaged cells that build up as we age and cause inflammation and other age-related issues.
Wow. It really feels like we're on the edge of a huge change in how we understand and maybe even treat aging. But our sources also make it clear that there are still some big challenges and unanswered questions about this programmed aging theory, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I would.
Not everyone is totally on board with the idea that aging is primarily a programmed process.
Okay.
One of the main things people debate is the evolutionary side of it. It can seem kind of counterintuitive at first, like, why would evolution favor a process that leads to decline and death?
Right. It doesn't seem to make sense on the surface.
Yeah. But proponents of programmed aging suggest that it could be an indirect result of genes that are actually beneficial early in life during our reproductive years, like we were discussing with that antagonistic pleiotropy idea.
So it's like this evolutionary compromise where the good stuff early on comes with a price to pay later.
Exactly. Another really important point is the difference between correlation and causation. You know, while the Horvath-Katcher clock and other epigenetic markers show a strong correlation with age, that doesn't automatically mean that one causes the other.
Okay.
We still need to figure out if these epigenetic changes are actually driving the aging process or if they're just a side effect of it.
That makes sense.
And finally, we have to remember that aging is incredibly complex. It's very likely that both programmed mechanisms and this buildup of random damage are playing a role, and figuring out how much each one contributes is a big challenge for scientists.
So while this idea of a biological clock ticking away is super compelling, we need to stay a little bit skeptical and appreciate how complicated aging really is.
Definitely.
So where is all this research headed? What are scientists focusing on as they move forward?
The field is moving ridiculously fast right now.
Yeah, it seems like it.
A lot of the focus is on continuing and expanding clinical trials of these epigenetic reprogramming technologies to see if they're safe and effective in humans.
Okay.
We also need a lot more research to really understand the mechanisms behind these universal aging clocks and how they connect to the actual biology's aging.
Right.
Refining these clocks and developing even more precise ones will be essential for tracking how well any future anti-aging treatments are working.
So important.
Ultimately, the big goal is to get a much deeper and more complete understanding of aging at its core. If we can definitively prove that aging is at least partly programmed, it could totally revolutionize how we approach medicine and could lead to some major breakthroughs in extending healthy human lifespan.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive into a field that's bursting with potential and raises so many big questions. It's amazing to think that our understanding of something as universal as aging could be on the verge of such a huge shift. So we've really explored that central question today. Is aging just wear and tear, or is there a program in our DNA? And while the scientific debate is still going on, the evidence for a programmed component is definitely becoming more and more convincing.
It is, and if we really think about the possibility that even just a part of the aging process is controlled by our genes, it brings up some really profound questions for you, the listener, to consider. What are the implications for society as a whole if we could actually manipulate that program? What new possibilities and challenges would we face if we could seriously extend the human lifespan? It really makes you think about the very nature of our biology and what it really means to age.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
See you next time.
Bye. Bye.